What is sports card grading? Happy hobby, I'm David Gonis, and if you're a sports card collector working with a limited budget, that's what we talk about here on this channel, and specifically today, we're talking about sports card grading. What is it? Why do people do it? Is it something I should do? These are the things we're going to kind of talk about. Now, this is more for the beginning sports card collector or somebody that's come back into the hobby after, let's say, 15, 20 years, and they're not really familiar with graded sports cards. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, what is sports card grading? Basically, think of it like this. Sports card grading is you or someone taking a card, sending it to a third party, sending it to someone else that has no ties to the card other than you paid them to evaluate it. They take the card, they look it over closely, very, very closely, and they determine what the condition of that card is, and they determine if it's authentic or not. Is it counterfeit? Is it the real deal? And whatever the answers are to those questions, they then give it a grade if it is indeed one that's worth grading, or they put an authentic label on it, and then they encapsulate it and send it back to you. Now, there's a lot of variations to all of that. They could charge you more if it's a more expensive card than you originally believed because of insurance. There's a lot of different things in there, but for the most part, all you have to worry about is sports card grading in a nutshell.
Help! I'm in a nutshell!
Is a third party looking at the card, determining the condition and its authenticity. Now, how do they come up with the condition? The condition is they look at four different things. They look at the corners, they look at the edges of the card, they look at the surface of the card, the front and the back surface. Are there problems with it? And then finally, they look at the centering. Not in that order, but those are the four things that they look at. CESC, corners, edges, surface, centering. Just remember that. So then they take those four, what are called subgrades. They give a grade from 1 to 10 to each of those items, and then they mash them all together, divide by 4, and that's the total grade. Now, with PSA, which is the largest of all the sports card grading services, they use a 1 to 10 scale. However, they do assign 0.5. They assign half values from 1 to 9. So you can get a 1.5. You can get an 8.5. But you can't get a 9.5 on PSA. They only go from 9 to a Gem Mint 10. So that's a big leap there. Now there's other companies like SGC which will give a 9.5. So for instance, this Aaron Judge is graded a 9.5. If this was a 9.51, let's say the number somehow, I don't know how the math would work. Say it's a 9.6. Now, SGC would give it a 9.5, but if this was sent to PSA, a 9.6 rounded up would be a 10. So that's where you have to start thinking of, well, where should I send this? Now, in this case, of that card, maybe you could do what's called cracking, where you take the card out, very dangerous, take the card out of the slab, resubmit it to another company like PSA, and hope it comes back a 10. Now, it's possible, though, that this card graded a 9.4, and so SGC rounded it up to a 9.5. So if I crack it, send it to PSA, now they may round it down from 9.4 to 9. So now it's worse. So it's quite the tricky move there. So I just don't do it. I just keep the 9.5. But a lot of people do. They have an eye that can tell this should be a 10. Okay, so let's go back to the different slabs. Let's first talk PSA. There's old slabs and there's new slabs. There's old labels, new labels. PSA has been around for 20 some odd years. So you can look at the old label like this one, which does not have any hologram or anything on there. PSA started putting holograms on there. So this one doesn't have that. That was an older slab. This one has a hologram label. Like you see, it's a little foil label right there. So that's that one. But even this one isn't a very new slab. Finally, the new slabs do have what's called the Lighthouse. It's the PSA label right there. And that's the foil, the silver foil hologram type label. And there's other stuff that's within the label itself that you can see that kind of determines that it's, and the reason for those is because now there's fake PSA slabs that have a fake PSA label in it that make you think it's an authentic slabbed PSA card. Lots of bad people out in this hobby. You'll find out. But the interesting thing to know is a lot of people bring up, well, what about counterfeit slabs? What about that? Look, if you're buying cards that have a chance to be a counterfeit slab, those are like thousands and thousands of dollars of cards. You're not buying a $50 card that's a counterfeit slab. Now, Victor Wembanyama, there's counterfeit cards that can be sent in that might get slabbed, but that's a whole separate thing altogether. But for the most part, don't worry about counterfeits and so much, because for the most part, you're not going to be dealing with that types of level. Again, we're sports card collectors on a limited budget. We're not worrying about a $5,000 card that might not be authentic. That's for someone else to deal with. So we're just talking about authenticity from these cards. Now, as I mentioned, this is a newer card. Right here, you can see the PSA certification number. Now, each grading company has these certification numbers. On SGC, it's a little tiny number right there. What that means is you can go onto their website, like gosgc.com or psacard.com, go to the certification area. There's a spot on their sites. Type in that code, and it should tell you that's the card and the grade that I just showed you. If it doesn't say that, it's a big problem. That's a big problem. So, one other thing I want to point out. PSA has their PSA cards certification, but they also have their PSA DNA certification number. Two different sections, two different categories or services within the company. PSA DNA is for autographs, for certified autographs, and they get these cards in and they certify that these are authentic autographs on these cards. So it's a PSA DNA certification. The reason I bring that up is because I bought this right here as an Archie Manning rookie card, and it was signed 1972, I believe, 1972 Archie Manning signed rookie card. It was signed, obviously. There's a lot of cards now that are signed before they get sold, before they go out from the manufacturer. They're signed and then put in packs. These were signed after the fact. I mean, it's from the 70s. They weren't sending out signed cards back then. But that PSA DNA number, if you look up that card on PSA's certification, it comes up a different card altogether. So I talked to the eBay seller about this. Hey, buddy, what's the deal? Did you send me it? So he's, no, look at the PSA DNA certificate. So then you look up, there's a PSA DNA certification, punch in that card, and that's the card it was. And it shows it was signed by Archie Manning. Big relief to me, but it's something to know for certain. There's 3 reasons you would want to get a card graded. You want it authenticated. I want to know, is this card a real card or is it counterfeit? I want to know, is this card trimmed? Has this card been doctored in any way? The grading companies will tell you this. They'll know. The second reason, I want it encapsulated. I want to know that the condition it's in right now is going to be the condition it's basically going to stay forever. Now, there's some, obviously, if you're in a house with a bunch of smokers, smoke may affect it. If your house gets flooded, maybe water affects it. There could be some problems with that. If you have your cards next to, like if I had all these cards right here facing the window with the window up, the sun could affect it. There's obviously other ways the card can be affected after it's encapsulated, but one thing you know is you won't affect the condition of that card by touching the corners or by holding it or getting your kid's Cheeto fingers grabbing the card or anything like that. It's not going to affect it. So that's the second reason, encapsulate. The third reason you'd want to get a card graded is to evaluate it. Now, what that means is when they put a condition or when they put a grade on that card, you are now going to be able to see what all of these cards have been selling for on eBay or Card Ladder or any of these other sites that tell you the most recent pricing on those cards. Yes, you can look at a raw card and find out what raw cards are selling for also. A raw card means it's not graded. The difference is you don't know what the condition of that raw card truly is, or at least what PSA or what these grading card companies believe that condition really is for that card. So once it's graded, you know the value. The value has been improved because now you've taken away all the questions about the condition of that card. So now the value's improved ostensibly. I'll give you a reason why that's not true, but that's an asterisk. Put an asterisk right there. So it takes away the friction of sales. So the reason you'd want to get your sports cards graded is to remove friction for when you want to sell it. Now, in my case, I've got these up here in my collection. Like, I don't really plan to sell these. There may come a time where I end up selling them. However, if I died, my wife's not going to be continuing on the collection. She's going to want to sell these. So by me getting them graded ahead of time, it's going to be much, much, much easier for her to get the value she should get from those cards because I got them graded, because I bought them graded. Graded cards removes the friction from sales, and that's an important thing. Now, when I say value, so authenticate, encapsulate, evaluate. The 3 8s, that doesn't make sense, but they're all 8s. Now, the third one, that evaluate. Now, here's where it gets tricky. If I have a raw card, say it's a modern card. I have a raw card, let's say it's a raw Ellie De La Cruz. And I say, you know what? I think this is a PSA 10. And let's say it's a parallel or it's a special card or something like that. And I think this is a great card. So I send it in to get graded. Now, if that raw card, let's say it's selling for $100, I send it in to get graded, and PSA determines it's an 8, and they send it back to me. Now it's encapsulated. It was authenticated. Oh, this is for real, Ellie De La Cruz card. It's sealed up in a sonically sealed slab, and it's valuated to be, this is an 8. Most likely, that card's going to be more valuable as a raw card when people don't know what the condition is than if it's below a 9. We're talking modern cards. Say you have a card from the 80s, a Phil Simms raw card that looks pretty good. Now, a raw Phil Simms card, rookie card we're talking, might be, let's say it's a $50 card. Let's say it's a $40 card. You send it in to get graded, and it comes back as a PSA 4. It's going to be a lower grade than if it was just the raw card that you're trying to sell. So there are cases where the graded card is going to be less valuable than the raw card. In all honesty, though, it's, people still crack them. They'll sell them raw because they'll make more money. It's not, I don't know if that's really an honest thing to do, but I mean, you're not selling a card saying this is a mint condition card. If you're saying that, then you are being dishonest. But if you just crack it, you say it's a raw card, and you show it has imperfections on it, and they can see that it has imperfections, don't doctor up the photos or anything, then that's not really being dishonest. But it's not great because now you're selling a card that you know is less than the value than what you're selling it. So that's kind of my explanation on what is card grading. That's basically what it is. It's a third party determining the value, the condition, and encapsulating that card and determining its authenticity so that you may then either sell it or hold on to it as one of your own assets, and now you have a value on that card. It's easier for you to sell it in the future. There's a lot of controversy around sports card grading. A lot of people think, oh, grading has ruined the hobby and all that stuff. Honestly, I don't think that's the case. I love the graded cards. They look fantastic. They look like pieces of art. I put them up in my display. They're beautiful. A raw card can also look beautiful. I don't say you have to get cards graded at all. But for me, I like knowing that the values are easily found for a graded card, so that's easier for either me to sell or for my family to sell. So that's how I look at it. Something else I want to talk about real quick is the differences between the numbers. The difference between a PSA 9, we're just going to use PSA 9 in general, but it's any of the card grading services. PSA 9 compared to a PSA 10, it's about 3 to 4 times different. Sometimes greater in many cases, and sometimes a little lower. But if you get a PSA 9 card for, let's say, $20, and a PSA 10 for that card could be $80 to $100. So that's kind of the difference. And then from PSA 9 to 8, it's a little smaller difference. The reason a PSA 10 gem mint card is a big deal, and you should want to buy those kinds of cards or get your cards graded that way, is because it means there are no cards out there that are in better condition than that PSA 10. Does that make sense? So that's why PSA 10 is a big deal. There are no cards better than that card. Now, there are other companies that grade a little bit differently. Like, for instance, Beckett has BGS 9.5. Their 9.5, BGS 9.5, means PSA 10. And then they have a pristine Beckett 10, BGS 10. So those pristine ones are considered flawless. They're better than a PSA 10s. However, they're so few and far between that they're kind of forgotten. And Beckett BGS themselves over the past 5 years has kind of moved to the back of the pack, so to speak. So PSA 10s continue to rule. They have the most slabs out there. They're still grading the most cards every month. PSA is really still the king of the jungle. Now, if we go back and look down at the other end of the scale, PSA 1, just because you have a card and you send it in to get graded, it does not mean, even in the worst condition, that it would get a PSA 1. A PSA 1 still has to reach a certain level of grade that it can be graded as a PSA 1. Otherwise, it would just be graded as authentic. Same with SGC. If it's a card that has paper loss on the front, if there's problems with it, if it's missing some corner, if it's torn in half, there's a lot of reasons why a card won't get even a 1. So, when you go to look at your own cards and you try to grade and try to think of what they're going to be, grading is tough. A PSA 5, if I showed you a PSA 5 compared to a PSA 9, there's a few flaws that are different, but if you owned an old card that was a PSA 5, you'd be pretty happy. Like, those are still nice cards. Think about this. A collector's grade is one number above the decade that card came out. So if it's in the 50s that the card came out and it's a PSA 6, that's called a collector's grade. That's what a lot of collectors would seek, is a collector's grade, one number above the decade. For someone such as myself, I have a limited budget. So a number the same as the decade, or even a number under the decade, I'm fine with that too. A PSA 4 of a 1953 card, that's pretty cool. I'm good with that. Now, as you get farther into the more recent decades, when there's a lot more cards out there, I don't know, a PSA 7 of an 80s card, that's not quite as desirable because there were so many 80s cards produced. A lot of people collected then, so if you're a collector and you think about getting them graded, a lot of your cards are probably going to, at best, be 7s. At best. Because there's been a lot of, there wasn't quite the protection on cards that we have available to us now with penny sleeves and top loaders and all that good stuff. So think about that. If you get a PSA 7, maybe that's a good thing. Like I've got PSA 7s of cards from the I have PSA 7s of 90s cards it's a card I like. I'm fine with it. PSA 7 isn't an ugly card. One other thing I want to mention is PSA does what they call qualifiers. Let me get some light on here. So you see right here, it's an excellent to mint, this Reggie Jackson PSA 6 MC. It means it's a miscut. You can see how the centering is so off. So they gave it what's called a qualifier of it being a miscut. Why is that important? When you're shopping for cards, when you're looking on eBay and you just search PSA 6, that card's going to come up. You might not really register that it's got a qualifier. You might not know what the qualifier is. There's different qualifiers. There's OC for off center. There's ST for a stain, like there's a gum stain on the back. So there's different qualifiers, and what that means generally is you can take two numbers off the grade. So instead of PSA 6, it's now PSA 4. So just think about that. Try not to buy cards with qualifiers unless you get a great deal, and a PSA 4 that could be a great deal if you get that price. At any rate, enjoy collecting your cards. Sports card grading is a cool thing. It's a neat thing. It's a nice addition to the hobby. It's not something that killed the hobby. I love my collection. I love them graded. I love them that I can't mess up the condition any more than I did already when I was 12 years old. So I love it. Whatever you do, collect, enjoy what you collect, and have a happy hobby.